The subject of this series is called the restoration of all things. Bible prophecy is something that's it's a wonderful thing that God has provided for us. But we understand as Christadelphians that there are different interpretations of Bible prophecy in the Brotherhood. So if you don't agree with everything that we present tonight, that's fine. But though we did sort of have a look last week at our constitution, our statement of faith, and we saw two clauses that related that we do all believe in, is that the the kingdom of God involves the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. And so let's move on. And what we're going to do today's class, the middle section of this class is going to be a bit rushed. And the reason it's a bit rushed is because for most of us, this is going to be revision. For those of us who came to the seminars, you'll recognize some of the slides. So if you think, this is your typical sort of seminar talk on Bible prophecy, well, part of it is, but there's also a fairly interesting bit, especially towards the end. So I ask that you do hang on there. Now, when we talk about the order of events in the big scheme of things, those 6 things that I've got there on the screen are pretty much what most of us would agree to. We believe that Christ will return to the earth. After that, there'll be the resurrection and the judgment. Somewhere in amongst that mix will be the Battle of Armageddon, and then there'll be the 1,000-year reign of Christ and the saints. And then at the end of the millennium, there'll be the second resurrection, and there'll be another judgment of the mortals who lived in that millennium. And then at the end, we find that there'll be no mortals left. Everyone will be immortal, and God will be all and in all. The focus of this series, even though today and next week, God willing, we'll be talking about a period sort of leading up to the Battle of Armageddon and Armageddon itself, by far the majority of this series focuses on the 40-year period that perhaps begins with the Battle of Armageddon. We don't know the exact start of that period or when that will be, but we believe that there's a 40-year period, and certainly was the belief of Brother Thomas that there'd be a 40-year period to establish the kingdom of God on the earth, and finally for Christ and the saints to establish their rule throughout the whole earth. So a bit of revision from last week, and we spent a lot of time talking about this and proving this, that the rule is, when we see the term Judah and Israel in the same context relating to latter-day Bible prophecy, we would say that Judah represents the Jews living in the land at the time of Christ's coming. Whereas we see the term Israel would refer to the Jews living in the other nations at the time of Christ's coming. All right? So remember the rule, and we've got to understand it correctly. When we see these two names in the same context, and we see them as two separate identities in the same context, we can understand it like we have there on the screen. Now, we briefly looked at this slide last week, a little snippet out of Elpis Israel, that Brother Thomas, he believed that there were 2 stages. This is what he said. The truth is there are 2 stages in the restoration of the Jews. The first is before the Battle of Armageddon, and the second after it. Okay, so there's going to be a restoration of Jews before the Battle of Armageddon, and he goes on to say that, or he implies certainly that first stage is the restoration of Judah. All right, That's because it's the Jews in the land. The second after it is referring to Israel, the Jews who are still scattered around the world after Christ's return, after the Battle of Armageddon. All right, but he says both stages are pre-millennial. In other words, both restorations have to happen before the 1,000 years actually start, before Christ rules over all the nations. And you may remember that I explained that the old Dave Zammit used to, and I think a lot of the Christadelphian community is guilty of this, is that the old Dave Zammit and the Christadelphian community relate a lot of the restoration prophecies to 1948 or the current state of Israel now, right? And I'd like to propose to you that the vast majority of restoration prophecies relating to the Jews are yet to be fulfilled. Certainly some have been fulfilled, and I'm going to show you the ones that have. Okay. But the vast majority of prophecies relating to Israel's restoration are still yet to be fulfilled and will be fulfilled after the coming of Christ. So that's a little bit of a statement I've just put out there for the moment. So if we had to summarize the Armageddon, what would we say? We'll say, all right, Gog invades Israel. 2/3 of the Jews in the land are killed. Then Christ and the saints stand on the Mount of Olives. There's a major earthquake, and Israel is saved. Gog is defeated, and the army and equipment are buried. Now, we're only going to look at the first 2 points in today's class, and then, God willing, in next week's class, we look at points 3 and 4. All right. Now, so Zechariah 12 is probably one of the best proofs we have that Judah refers to the Jews who are in the land at the time of Christ's coming. God says that he will save the tents of Judah first. And from this context, we can clearly see that that it's referring to Jews or Israelis who are in the land of Israel. All right. Now, remember that Brother Thomas lived well before there was any state of Israel. And it was in 1948, exactly 100 years before Israel was re-established as a nation, that he makes this comment in Elpis Israel. And it's a prediction that passed the test of time. And we briefly looked at this last week, but I just want to spend a little bit more time on it. And it says this, it says, there is then a partial and primary restoration of Jews. Now, when he means primary, he doesn't mean the most important. It just means the first. So when we talk about primary school, it's the first school that we attend, right? It doesn't mean it's the most important schooling, though it could be, but it's the primary restoration, the first restoration of Jews before the manifestation, before the coming of Christ, which is to serve as the nucleus or basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he has appeared in the kingdom. So there's the 2 stages, right? The first stage, there'll be a partial restoration of Jews before Christ's coming, which is going to serve as the basis it's going to be in the land. There'll be to become the base of future operations, which will happen after Christ's return. But this is what he said. He said, the pre-adventural colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles. And the Jewish colonists will return there in unbelief of the messiahship of Jesus and of the truth as it is in him. They will emigrate there as agriculturists and traders in the hope of ultimately establishing their commonwealth, but more importantly, more immediately of getting rich in silver and gold. Now, why did Brother Thomas say this? Why did he say that the Jews that returned there would be returning there on purely political principles? Why even the need to say that? Well, firstly, why he said it is because the Bible indicates that. Okay, we're gonna look at that shortly. But why the need to say it in the year 1848? So in this book in Elpis Israel, it's on page 440. It's worth a read. So if you do get time later this evening after class, have a read of page 440 and maybe 441, just 2 pages, and you will see that there was this thing, this belief amongst Christians at the time that the Jews would return to the land, but that there was a movement to bring Jews back to the land. It's called Christian Zionism, and what the feeling was amongst Christian Zionism was the reason they would bring Jews to the land was to teach them Christianity, so that Christ would come. All right, so they believed that if we teach the Jews in the land, bring Jews to the land, teach them Christianity, that would bring about the coming of Christ. Right, and so there were movements to promote this, I guess, if you like. Brother Thomas, living in that age, says, no, it's not going to be like that at all. The Jews aren't going to return to the land believing in Jesus Christ, or certainly, and of the truth as it is in him. Right? That's why he mentions that. But he says they're going to go there for their own reasons. It's not for religious reasons at all. Okay, so I hope that sort of provides a bit of a basis on why Brother Thomas had to write that, because that was not the belief in the day. And just read page 440, at least that top paragraph, and that's the Logos edition, page 440. So where he sort of speaks about this. All right, so let's move on. Now, so just want to summarize what Brother Thomas said there. He said that there would be a partial restoration of Jews to the land. It would happen before Christ's coming. The Jews would return in unbelief of Christ. The nation would be built on worldly ambitions. The land would become the center of future operations. And so how did Brother Thomas know all this? Because the first 4 dot points have come true, haven't they? It is exactly like he said in this particular regard. And the land would become the center of future operations. I guess we know that from clear Bible prophecy, don't we? And remember this book, right? This book, Elpis Israel, written 175 years ago. That page that stood the test of time, because Brother Thomas was a diligent Bible student. So this is how he knew, and let's turn to Joel chapter 3, and I think we'll turn there, Joel chapter 3, and I'm going to ask Brother Dan if he could read verses 1 and 2 for me, please.
For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there, and will plead for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land.
Right, thank you. So he says, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, right, then I will gather all nations and bring them into the valley of Jehoshaphat. So Brother Thomas could see that before the Battle of Armageddon, there would be a regathering of Jews back to the land, into the land of Israel and Jerusalem itself. Okay, so this is certainly one verse. This is Joel chapter 3 is proof that of 1948 and 1967 happening. All right, so clearly that's a verse that we can use in our seminars, hand on heart, no problem at all. Right, that's certainly one proof there. And then, of course, another one is in Ezekiel 38. Now, if you like, I've got it on the screen here. We don't need to turn there, where it says, in the latter years, you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. So I'm going to ask you a few questions here. So it says, in the latter years, you, who is the you there? They will come into the land. Which land? And then it says towards the end, who's the they? They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. Who's the you? Who's the land? So who's the you here, if you can see my screen? Who's the land? Who's the they and the them?
Well, the you is Gog.
Yes. And we know that from the context, which we didn't read the verse before. Right? So you is Gog and the nations that come with Gog, yeah.
And the them is Israel.
The land of Israel, yeah, exactly. It's the Lord, the land of those brought back from the sword, because we know that God scattered them. They shall fall by the edge of the sword, Jesus said. And then, so Brother Thomas could see, well, there's going to be a time when they're going to be brought back from the sword, right? And onto the mountains of Israel. That's the land. That's the land, which had long been desolate. So in other words, after a very long time, they're going to be brought back. And now all of them dwell safely. Who's them? Well, that's the Jews, isn't it? Okay, so it's the Jews dwelling safely in the land after being brought back. So Brother Thomas could clearly see that they would become a nation again, or certainly a people. There'd be a gathering of Jews before the return of Christ, before the Battle of Armageddon. Okay, and of course, in Zechariah 14, it says this: "Behold, the day of Yahweh is coming, and your spoil," that's Israel's spoil or Judah's spoil, "will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem." Okay, again, this is another passage that Brother Thomas would have seen to know that there would be a partial restoration of the Jews before the coming of Christ. Now, outside those three passages or those three chapters, there are little snippets here and there of hints that they would return before the land, but they are really the main three, right? And so many of the other restoration prophecies, I'd suggest, are yet to be fulfilled. So, all right, let's move on. So, what is the Battle of Armageddon? Well, we'd ask this question in the seminars. How many times does the word how many times does the word Armageddon appear in the scriptures? And I think we all know the answer. It's, Rob's going to answer. Rob, go, you can answer.
Well, it's once, but I think the inference is in Joel 3 as well.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so the word Armageddon appears once, all right, and it appears in this place here. And they gathered them together to the place called in the Hebrew Armageddon. That's Revelation 16, verse 16. Now, the word Armageddon comes from the Hebrew tongue. Okay, the Hebrew tongue. And so it's got something to do with the Hebrew. Now just hold that thought. So Brother Thomas suggests this, and I think he's right. Okay, it suggests that the word Armageddon is not actually the name of a place, but it's the transliteration of three Hebrew words. Amar, which means just simply the word sheaves. Or a bunch, right? A sheave is a bunch. And usually when we're talking about the word sheave, we're talking about a bunch of wheat. Okay. And that word Amar occurs 4 times in the Old Testament. It occurs 4 times in the Old Testament, and twice it's clearly got an Armageddon reference. So in Micah 4 verse 12, it says, "He will gather them," that's the nations, "like sheaves to the threshing floor." And in Zechariah 12, which is an Armageddon chapter, it says, "In that day I'll make the governors of Judah like a firepan in the woodpile and like a fiery torch in the sheaves." Right, so at least 2 out of 4 occasions where that word occurs in the Old Testament relates to Armageddon. And then you've got the word Gay, means a valley, and the word Dan, which means a judgment. Armageddon is a bunch of sheaves in a valley for judgment. Okay, so now what is really interesting is the next slide here, because even though the word Armageddon appears only once in the Bible, it's described in many other places. So in Revelation, it actually sort of gives us a bit of context at what it actually means, because it's describing it as a battle of that great day of God Almighty. It says, "For these are the spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty." The kings of the earth being the leaders of Europe, or the leaders of the old Roman Empire, and of the whole world, not just the old Roman Empire, but this spirit of madness goes out to the whole world to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. That great day, what day? If you are reading this for the first time and you read the battle of that great day, well, if I was a Bible student and reading that, I think, well, if it mentions that great day of God Almighty, I'm going to expect that it is described elsewhere in the Bible. All right? God is expecting that we know all about this battle already. And what day is it? Well, it's the day of Yahweh, the battle of that great day, the day of Yahweh, which is described in many places in the Old Testament. Now, here's one. I find this slide very interesting. Look what it says here. This is from Zephaniah 3, verse 8. And this is a passage I believe describes the Battle of Armageddon. This is what it says. "Therefore, wait for me, says Yahweh, until the day I rise up for plunder. My determination is to gather the nations to my assembly of kingdoms, to pour on them my indignation," or anger, "all my fierce anger. All the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy." This is in Zephaniah 3, verse 8. Now, I'm going to ask you a question here. There is something that is very, very unique about this Bible verse. Does anyone know what it is? Something very, very unique about Zephaniah 3, verse 8.
I know that it's the only verse that contains every letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
That's excellent, Dan. All right. It is the only Bible verse, the only verse in the Bible that contains every letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, isn't it interesting? Because what's the subject? Armageddon. What did Revelation say? Revelation says what Armageddon is. It's in the Hebrew tongue. And the one place where every letter of the Hebrew tongue exists is in this verse, which is a battle about Armageddon. Isn't that interesting? We'd think, is this a coincidence or what? I believe this is inspiration, right? Just one of those beautiful coincidences, if you want to, in inverted commas, of the Bible, which are more than just a coincidence. All right. So, my apologies for those who have been to the seminars many times. I've got 3 slides here to show that Joel chapter 3, Ezekiel 38, and Zechariah 14 speak about the same event, are all speaking about the Battle of Armageddon. And the reason I sort of emphasizing this, because there are some Christadelphians who say that these prophecies are speaking of separate events. Some people say that Ezekiel 38 is a different event to Zechariah 14. Okay? I'm going to suggest to you that they are the same event. Okay? And so, the way I'm going to do it now is by presenting it in dot form. So when we look at the time period of Joel 3, the time period is when Judah is restored. In other words, after 1948. The place is the Valley of Jehoshaphat, Jerusalem. Who's involved? All nations. The event is a major battle. And then the intervention is an earthquake. That's how the armies are destroyed. And the result is that Jerusalem is saved and God is glorified. So there's a little snapshot summary of Joel chapter 3. Now, with your eyes, I imagine John will get his camera out and take a photo, but with your eyes, I want you to take a snapshot of that, okay? The time, the place, who is involved, the event, how God intervenes, and the results, all right? We take that snapshot now because I'm going to move to the next one, all right? Now, so that's Joel chapter 3. Let's look at it in Ezekiel 38. Well, the time in verse 8 is described as the latter years. The place that's involved is the mountains of Israel. Who is involved? Well, many nations are listed. The event is a major invasion of Israel. God intervenes by means of a major earthquake. And the end result is that Israel is saved and God is glorified. Now, when I compare Joel 3 and Ezekiel 38, I'm pretty much seeing the same event. The dot points look very similar, don't they? All right, so take a snapshot of that one. All right. And again, there are some who say that Zechariah... sorry. I'll just throw this slide in. There's the nations that are listed in Ezekiel 38. We're not going to talk about that today. All right, the nations that come against Israel. Now, again, some Christadelphians say Zechariah 14, Ezekiel 38 are different battles. I'm going to suggest that they are the same battle. So look at the dot points again. The time period. The time period is after the Jews occupied Jerusalem, after 1967. The place is Jerusalem. Who is involved? All nations. The event is a major invasion of Jerusalem. How does God intervene? Well, it's a major earthquake that splits the Mount of Olives. And the end result is that God is glorified and is king over all the earth. All right. Isn't that, I see those dot points very similar to those other ones. And so we move on to this other passage of Zechariah chapter 2. Okay, so let's have a look at this now. So I did skip through that fairly quickly, and now we're probably just going to slow down a little bit here. Can we go to Zechariah chapter 2 and have a look at this? I think I'm doing all right with the time. Phew. Okay. So Zechariah 2.
Oh, you got 12 on the screen, Dave.
Oh, my apologies, Dan. My apologies. And that's good attention to detail. I like it. Zechariah 12 and verses 2 to 3. How about we read verses 1 to 3? Do you mind reading that for us, Dan?
No problem. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth and formeth the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered against it.
All right. And so there's the passage there, right? I'll make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And so I guess I'm going to start by asking one question here, because some have suggested that this would be just a local battle, that there would be two battles, but some are suggesting that Zechariah 12 is speaking about just a local battle of the surrounding nations, right? An inner ring war, as it's been termed, right? And Zechariah 14, on the other hand, is the Battle of Armageddon, which is an outer ring war. Yeah, the other nations come in, right? So that's been the suggestion, and it's all, like I said, we can all have different interpretations of Bible prophecy. But what I'm going to suggest, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to make a statement first. The statement is, I believe Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14 are the same event, okay? And Zechariah 13 is in that mix as well. Zechariah 12, Zechariah 13, Zechariah 14 are basically about the same event, the Battle of Armageddon. It's just that Zechariah 12 looks at it from a different perspective to Zechariah 13 and then Zechariah 14, right? Seeing it from different aspects, okay? Now, why do you think from Zechariah 12 verse 2, why do I think it's not just the surrounding peoples? When it says they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem, why do I think it's involving more nations than just the surrounding nations? Have a look at it in your Bible. I've cut it off the screen on purpose, but it's in your Bible.
All the people of the earth will be gathered together against it.
Thank you very much, right? So it says, I'll make a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples or nations when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem, though all peoples of the earth, what does it say? So when they lay siege against Jerusalem, and it'll happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples, all who would heave it away, surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. And look, if there is a separate battle of an inner ring and then an outer ring, then so be it. If that happens, so be it. But what I would like to propose to you is that that Zechariah 12 is primarily talking about the Battle of Armageddon. If there's an inner ring war first, then let's see if that happens or not. I'll be open to that. But the way I see that is that the surrounding nations there are the nations that have gathered, that have surrounded Jerusalem, because all the nations of the world are going to travel there to besiege it. Does that make sense? And so, if you like, the nations that are listed in Ezekiel 38 will become the surrounding peoples because they are going to lay siege. Right? It's just like when we said the Romans surrounded Jerusalem. They weren't a surrounding nation. They came from a long way away, but they besieged Jerusalem. But they were the nation that surrounded them. That's how I see it anyway. Feel free to have your own opinion there. And by all means, please listen to all different talks and make your own mind on what you think is going to happen there. But regardless, Jerusalem is going to come under siege, at least once more. Do you know Jerusalem has been besieged at least 23 times before in its history. And it says, it's been this city has been the subject of so many conflicts over the years. One commentator says Jerusalem has been the subject of at least 118 conflicts. The city has been captured at least 40 times and has been besieged at least 23 times. And Zechariah 12 describes yet one more time that it will come under siege. Right? And so this city is going to be laid siege once again. Now, Isaiah 59 describes this invasion. This describes the enemy coming in like a flood. All right? Now, I just want to sort of put it in picture what that sort of would look like. Now, in World War II, there was this thing called the Siege of Malta. Right? Now, Malta will go down in history as the most bombed place on earth. Right? In the year between the years 1940 and 1942, there were a total of about 15,000 tons of bombs that were dropped on this little island that's only 27 kilometres long at its longest point and about 15 kilometres wide. So to give you an idea, from Wattle Grove to the city, I think is 30 kilometres. So the longest length of Malta is less than from Wattle Grove to the city of Sydney. Just to sort of put that in perspective. It's not a very big island. The most bombed place on earth. The people of Malta really, really suffered in this siege of Malta. Just one attack lasted 154 days straight. It was just this continuous bombing for 154 days. And there were, in that 154 days, there were 3,343 air raids. That's a lot, isn't it? My parents lived through, that were there in Malta, lived in that time, and they would have been the ages of between 12 and 14 in that time. Right? And Mum used to tell me the stories of the war. And Malta was under siege. The reason it was under siege was because it was really the only bit of Allied territory, this little dot in the middle of the Mediterranean, surrounded by the Axis powers. So north of there was Europe, which was controlled by Hitler and Mussolini. To the south was controlled by, it was North Africa. A majority of it was controlled by the enemy powers as well. So Malta was this only little dot of Allied territory, which was a real thorn in Hitler's side, because from Malta, the British launched their air attacks against convoys. So what would happen is General Rommel, he'd want to supply North Africa, so he'd be sending ships from Europe, from Italy and so forth, down into North Africa. But from Malta, these ships would get bombed. And so what happened was the Axis powers, Germany and Italy, were trying to force Malta into surrender. Right? And they did it by this continual bombing. And it got to the point where Malta was starved. There was this siege. They couldn't get any food in there. There was no. They're running out of fuel. They're running out of aircraft. There were only, I think, at one stage, there were only 3 biplanes left to defend the island. It was almost, it got to the point of almost surrender. And it wasn't. There was convoy after convoy got sunk, and there was this last ditch convoy. They called it the Santa Maria convoy in the end. This last ditch convoy to come and save and to bring all this food and fuel and into Malta and parts for the planes and so forth. And of course, the enemy powers knew about it. They bombed it, but some of it survived, and it was the turning point in the war. Unfortunately, that convoy arrived on the 15th of August, which is the major feast day to Mary. So the Maltese, of course, being a Catholic nation, attributed this little victory to the Virgin Mary. But that's beside the point. Now, why did I talk about all that in the context of this? The reason, because I like to talk about Malta, yeah, that's what Delita said. But it's more than that. It's more than that. It's because even though Malta was the most heavily bombed place on earth, I would much have rather lived in Malta than in a place like Crete or mainland Europe, where you physically saw the enemy standing in front of you. On Malta, not one enemy soldier landed on Malta. They did not look face to face with the enemy, only from the air and the sea. Right? In other countries, they were invaded. They were invaded, and the enemy armies would plunder the houses. They'd break in, they'd rape the women, they'd do all terrible things, and you saw the enemy face to face. That is what is going to happen to Israel. And it's not just a little invasion. It says when the enemy comes in like a flood. Now, I know we've got short memories, but the last few years we've had some big floods, haven't we? Right, some huge floods in New South Wales. And you see this gushing body of water just come and ravage the place, destroys everything in its path. That's how it describes the invasion of Judah and Jerusalem. The enemy will come in like a flood. They will see the enemy face to face. This is how it's described here. Multitudes in the valley of decision. It says about Gog, it says, you will ascend coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops and many peoples with you. And God says, for I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. This is not just a little skirmish. This is a major, massive invasion. And we read in Zechariah 13, verse 8, it says, it shall come to pass in all the land, says Yahweh, that 2/3 in it shall be cut off and die. Right? So this is talking about all the Jews, or all the Israelis, if you like, in the land of Israel. And that's why God has to save the tents of Judah first. That's why it says that in Zechariah 12, I will save the tents of Judah first, because 2/3 of them are going to be cut off and die. 2 out of every 3 in the land will die. Horrible time for Israel. And so of the 6.8 million Jews in the land, over 4 million will perish at the hand of the invading army. Horrible, isn't it, when you think about it like that? And then, let's read this. So Zechariah 14 and verse 12. Can you read that for me? Oh, sorry, I did it again. Zechariah 14 verses 1 to 2. Dan, could you please read that, verses 1 and 2?
Sure. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city.
Right, thanks. And so Jerusalem, which has been trodden down by the Gentiles since the time, So Jerusalem, which has been trodden down by the Gentiles since the time of the Babylonian invasion, will now be taken for one last time. Right? And the old city of Jerusalem, which was recaptured by the Israeli army back in 1967, Israel declared Jerusalem as its undivided eternal capital in 1980. And, while 1967 got us very excited as Bible students because we saw a turning point in Bible prophecy, the way I read the scriptures is that the Bible clearly shows, to me anyway, that the Gentiles will trample her down once more under the leadership of Gog. Now, I'm going to put a caveat on that, and just so you're aware of another interpretation of this, is that some will say that the old city will not be captured. All right? So 1967 will hold true, that Jerusalem will no longer be trampled. But the way I read Zechariah 12, the way I read Zechariah 14, is it seems to be telling me that the city will be taken. That's how I read it. So just be aware there are a couple of interpretations regarding that. So what's going to happen then? It talks about the spoils of Jerusalem. The spoils of Israel will be divided up. Jerusalem will be captured. The houses rifled. In other words, soldiers banging on the doors, breaking into the doors of houses. The women ravished. Right? I don't need to explain what that means. Right? And the way the NET reads those verses, it says the city will be taken, its houses plundered, and the women raped. This is the result of an invading army. Right? Now, Israel to date has won every battle that her enemies have started. However, this time the city will be taken, and the pride and joy of Israel, which is Jerusalem, will be gone, will seem to have gone. Now, who would ever have thought that this would happen again? A repeat of the Holocaust. Because look what it says there in verse 2. It says, then half the city will go into exile. That's half the city of Jerusalem. But the remainder of the people will not be taken away. Okay? And half the city, half Jerusalem's Jewish population will be taken into exile, sent away. Now, in 2022, the year 2022, there were 590,000 Israelis, like Jews, living in Jerusalem. So if this were to happen now, then about 300,000 Jews will be taken captive and exiled. Okay. You think this is impossible, right? Unthinkable. In modern times, how can something like this happen? How can we get a repeat of the Holocaust? Right. Well, it's going to happen, right? Remember, in modern times, 6 million Jews were exterminated by the German Nazi regime, right? And we even saw what Gog would have done what has done in the Ukraine even more recently. So Russia has done, rather. So now, how will this happen? How will this happen? Well, we need to read just this. I think this is the last passage we turn to. It is. So this is the last passage we're going to read. Can you please read Joel 3, verses 4 to 6? I want us to all turn there. I think this is important and a really interesting part of the talk today. So Joel 3, verses 4 to 6.
Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Will ye render to me a recompense? And if ye recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense upon your own head? Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold to the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border.
Right. See that? Look what it says. The people of Judah and the people of Jerusalem you have sold to the Greeks, that you may remove them far from their borders. Now, I listened to a talk very recently by Brother Ken Whitehead, and it totally puts my understanding of this prophecy totally upside down. Right? He suggests that this part of the prophecy there, that where it says you may remove them far from their borders, is talking historically. I'm suggesting that this is yet to happen, right? That this is a prophecy yet to happen, that the people of Judah and the people of Jerusalem are going to be removed far from their borders. Because I link that with Zechariah 14, verse 2, which says half the city will go into captivity, right? They're going to be exiled from their city. They're going to be sent away. And so where will they go is the question. Where will they go? And will they be sent beyond the borders of Israel? That's what this passage seems to indicate. Now, it's interesting because Jeremiah 3 indicates that both Israel and Judah, the two entities, are going to walk together out of the land of the north. And you see Jeremiah 3 is a future context, right? They're going to walk together out of the land of the north. Could this indicate that some of Judah will be sent to the land of the north as captives? Perhaps, just perhaps, and it's only a suggestion, it's only Dave Zammit talking here, perhaps the concentration camps of Europe, which are currently a museum, will they be recommissioned again? Interesting thought. Do you know the spoils of war can often include their people? Now think about it. Daniel and his 3 friends were taken to Babylon. They were the spoils of the battle, right? They were taken as captives. Why? Because they were smart people. After World War II, just right at the end of World War II, the Allies and the Russians rushed into Germany to get hold of Germany's leading scientists, just to get the expertise and the upper hand in military technology. Now, with Israel being one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, it is likely then that Russia will take Jewish scientists for themselves as one of the spoils of the war. That's the suggestion here. Now, my question is to you, if this passage is yet future, which I believe it is, right? I believe this happens, this deporting of Jews happens during Armageddon. Who will do this work of deporting the Jews out of their land? Well, the passage tells us here. It says, Tyre and Sidon and all the coasts of Philistia, they are the ones involved with selling the Jews to the Greeks. The Greeks there, I believe, is just synonymous for the Gentiles. They are going to be the ones that remove them far from their borders, that you may remove them far from the borders. Look at it. Look at verse 6, Joel 3, verse 6. Right? Sorry, you all turned there, but I didn't. Joel 3, verse 6. It says there. It says, also the people of Judah and people of Jerusalem, you have sold to the Greeks, that you may remove them far from their borders. Who's the you? It's Tyre, Sidon, and all the coasts of Philistia. Now, who are they? Well, if you look at a map, Tyre and Sidon is Lebanon. All right, it's located. It's modern day Lebanon. Whereas the coasts of Philistia, well, that's the Gaza Strip. They're the Palestinian people. You could almost look into it. You could almost say Hezbollah and Hamas. Well, I don't know whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas. I don't know, but it certainly comes out of Lebanon, the Lebanese, and the Palestinians. And they are, I'm going to suggest here, that they become Gog's willing helpers. When Gog invades the lands and has got all these Jews rounded up, and what are we going to do with these people? There'll be a people named Tyre, Sidon, the coast of Philistia, put their hand up and say, Sir Gog, we'll look after that for you. and they become Gog's contractor, if you like, to deport the Jews out of the land. Interesting thought, isn't it? No? And that's very different to what is being promoted now amongst Christadelphians in terms of Bible prophecy. So I'm just putting it out there that it's different, so you make up your own mind. I just want you to remember this little phrase here. What's Tyre and Sidon and Coast of Philistia going to do? They're going to remove the Jews. Look what it says. Remove them far from their borders. Hold that thought for about the next 4 minutes, all right, till I finish this class. They're going to be removed far from their borders. Hold that thought. And then this is when Ezekiel 37 comes to pass. When 2/3 of the land, 2/3 of the Israeli population in the land are killed, the land is just flooded with an enemy, all is lost. 300,000, at least, Israelis are taken captive, deported, families, mothers, children, deported out of the land. This is when they say, our bones are dry, our hope is lost, and we ourselves are cut off. We're finished. And I believe that is when Ezekiel 37 will be fulfilled. And that's not only me, because Brother Thomas believed it as well. I'm putting a little snippet on here, Eureka, volume 5, page 313. He talks about the very dry bones of Israel shall come together, bone to bone, flesh to flesh. He's talking about this after Armageddon, all right? That this army of Israeli, this Israeli army is going to be put together after Armageddon by Christ and the saints. This is... I just want to prove that it's not just me making this up, all right? This is Brother Thomas believing this as well. You'll have to read that in your own time. We don't have to go through this. But why is this necessary? Why is God bringing all this decimation on the land? Well, it's because of this. He says in Ezekiel 39, verse 25, 26, he says, I will be jealous for my holy name after they have borne their shame and all their unfaithfulness, in which they were unfaithful to me. When? When they dwelt safely in their own land and no one made them afraid. And we've seen that Israel has become a secular country that in the main are just like any other Western country in terms of morality. They've forgotten about God. All right? And it says that this is going to, God has a prophecy here that they're going to be unfaithful again in the latter days when they dwell safely in their own land, which is how it is described, the situation when Gog comes into the land, isn't it? So maybe just we are yet to see a time, maybe we'll be at the judgment by this point, we don't know. But maybe we're yet to see a time where there'll be this sense of dwelling safely in their own land. There certainly will be just before the Battle of Armageddon anyway. Whether we see it or not as Christadelphians, we don't know. So when God says, so I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. Right? Because they've given God a bad name over the years. And so here we have the nation of Israel destroyed, or so it seems. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is the time of Jacob's trouble. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, Daniel 12 verse 2 says. Joel 3, it says the sun and moon will grow dark and the stars will diminish their brightness. Israel will look like it's been eclipsed. And then I believe this is the fulfillment of Jeremiah 31 verse 15. A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Right? What happened when Jesus was a baby was just a type. This is the actual fulfillment of it. Right? Rachel weeping for her children because they are no more. It will seem that all is lost for Israel. They will be at their lowest point in all history. The pride of Judah will be brought very low, and the people of the land will be desperate for a Messiah. And it is at this point, and only at this point, will God step in to help the Jews. Okay? And I picture this, all right? I don't know if this is just Dave Zammit working his imagination, right? That after the judgment, we will be waiting to march into the land with Christ to save the Jews. And I can imagine us, if we could, talk to Christ and say, can we go in and save Judah? And he says, no, not yet. It's not the right time. And then we hear of this invading army and people are being killed. You know, Jews being shot in the streets everywhere. Buildings being blown up everywhere. And we say to the Lord, can we go now? Please, it's time. Surely it must be time. And he says, no, not yet. And then we hear about these houses being broken into and you know, husbands being shot in front of their families and children and women are being deported out of the land by these Palestinian and Lebanese people. And we say to Christ, can we go? And he says, no, not yet. And the things get so bad that half the city of Jerusalem is deported and 2/3 of the Jews are annihilated. And they're on their knees. And the Lord says, let's go. We're going to save them. And that is what happens next. And this is the last slide. And I love this slide. And look what it says. Thus says Yahweh, refrain your voice from weeping. That's Rachel weeping, isn't it? And your eyes from tears, for your work shall be rewarded, says Yahweh. And look what it says. Remember I asked you to remember that verse? What did it say? That the people of Sidon, that would remove them far from their borders? And here it says, and they shall come back from the land of their enemy. There is hope in your future, says Yahweh, that your children shall come back to their own border. And that's the good part of the story, which we will leave. The remainder of this story we will answer next week, God willing. You know, it says, and I get a bit teary when I see this slide, I can't look at the slide, sorry. It says, in that day, I will open my eyes on the house of Judah. And the reason I get teary is because this photo was 10 years ago. And these children will be teenagers now, adults, young adults. Perhaps 2 out of every 3 of those will be killed. But it says, in that day, I will open my eyes on the house of Judah. That's when Deuteronomy 30 will be fulfilled. That's when God shows favor to Israel or to Judah, is when they return to him. Right? Am I implying something here? Right? We can talk about that after the class. Thank you.